Hello guys, and welcome to a new Steel Division video today by me, Vulcan. Today I have for you the updated battle group overview for the Panzer-Lehr. So in this one I'm going to be talking about balance changes, of course, and the changes that I've made to my division since my last battle group overview video, which is definitely a lot. And yeah, we'll start off by looking at the Recon tab. So in the Recon, things are a little bit different to how they were before, in that I now bring 3 squads of Spear Troop instead of 2 squads of Spear Troop and a squad of Aufklärer. Then I have the 2 cards of Pumas, the 2-star Pumas in Phase A. I no longer bring in the 2, 3, 4, 1s. Now the reason I've chosen just to go for Spear Troop is because I just find that they act as supplementary infantry in Phase A, which is actually very, very useful. Whereas Aufklärer, they just don't fill that same role. Like Spear Troop with the basically 4-man squads with the machine gun can definitely hold their own and keep infantry at bay for quite a while. And it's very, very useful when you have a limited amount of Panzer Grenadiers in your infantry tab. So that's kind of where I've gone with the Recon tab now, but Aufklärer, yeah, they're okay, but honestly, I'd much prefer Speer Troop. As for the Pumas, well, the Pumas actually had a price reduction in the Division Bell patch, and they went from 110 points to 100 points, so they're even more worth bringing in now than they were before. And the thing is with Pumas, they are fantastic for cleaning up flanks that, well, you're not going to be basically bumping into enemy tanks, or basically any enemy tanks, because even a Stuart can penetrate this at maximum range, right? And I don't find that the Pumas are that reliable to hit. Whereas if they're just up against like a bunch of half tracks and so on, then you're going to do well. And the great thing about the Puma is it does have the speed in order to like flank quite easily. So you can just keep it out of line of sight of AT guns and enemy tanks, and then you can play around that very nicely with the other units that you are using. So that's what I'd use the Pumas for, and I actually don't tend to bring them out that often, but still very decent units. As for the other options in Phase B, the 2, 3, 4, 1, I just found I never brought it in anymore, and it just cost a lot for what it did. As for the 233, same deal. If it had the very high optics still, then it would definitely be worth it. And moving into Phase B and C, Pumas become a bit redundant compared to the other units that you can bring. And your Spear Troop will remain your staple recon throughout the game anyway. So let's move on to the Infantry tab. So the Infantry tab is another thing that's changed a little bit. I basically switched out one card of the MG42s for some more Panzer Grenadiers in Phase B. I used to have 2 cards of Pioneers in Phase C, but I just found that in Phase B I was struggling so much for infantry that I needed that extra supplement there. Because you've only got 4 units of Panzer Grenadiers in Phase A and then 6 more in Phase B now, and that's like living life on the edge. More Pioneers in Phase C is great, but it's just getting there and making sure that you remain careful with your infantry throughout the game. So of course I have the Panzergrenadier in Phase A. They are, I believe, the only command unit in the game or in the division that you can get in Phase A. Like, there is none other that you can get in Phase A that gives you command. It's actually kind of ridiculous. So you're playing around 2 squads of Panzergrenadier in Phase A, so you've got to be very careful with getting your units surrendered as the Panzer-Lehr early on, but you will end up finding that you play around not using command quite a lot. But in general, Panzergrenadier, always a must. Have at least one command in your division at least, so that's going to be taking up a slot there. As for the other 2, Panzer Grenadiers, of course. Everybody knows what Panzer Grenadiers do. They have the really nice long-range capability. At 300-meter range, they have 11 HE, which is a lot of damage. You can also get MG42s in Phase A, but again, you just need the bulk, and these are 10-man squads, and MG42 is a 4-man squad, and that's basically the reason that you would be bringing in Panzergrens over MG42s. As for Phase B, well, you do get more Panzergrenadiers with like 3 of them available on this card, but Panzer Grenadiers are where it's at. They are just such versatile units, and replacing them with something like an MG42 or another squad of command just isn't ideal in this division. Then moving into Phase C, Pioneers are fantastic at that close range and long range engagement. Very versatile squad with the two 20HG power grenades. Stern Pioneer are a possible choice over the Pioneers depending on how you play. And Pioneer Fieres with the 251-9s late game, I would bring them if I had an extra slot, but unfortunately I do not, because this 251-9 has, well, it's just really good when it's 3-star. But that's about it for the infantry. Just got to be very careful not to lose too many of them and play around your low availability with other units on the division. Let's move into the tanks. So this is probably one of the most surprising parts of my division for a lot of people. I only have 6 cards of tanks, and I guess it's still a relatively high amount compared to what I had before. I had 7 before. But you can see the composition of my forces is really quite different. So now I have the Befehlpanzer 4s early on, and they are the 140 point cost Panzer 4s with the 2-star veterancy and command, and these are basically my early Phase B command support that I'll be bringing in. I don't bring them in necessarily to counter enemy tanks or armor, although they can be quite good at that because they have the 14 AP, but I mainly have them there as decent fire support for your infantry, as well as providing that command, because by Phase B it's very likely that you would have lost 2 cards of Panzergrenführer, and if not, then you're doing very well. So the Befehltiger, that is coming in as well in Phase B. Again, it's a command unit, and I used to bring in 2 cards, another 2 cards of the Panzer 4Hs, but I felt like the Befehltiger, it's just like a really nice cost. I always find that like the 280 is just that little bit pushed too far, whereas I find that I land on around 240 points quite often. So bringing in the Befehltiger is just a nice sort of boost to your game in Phase B. Then I have the Tiger E's here, and honestly I was thinking of changing these out so that I had more availability of tanks in Phase C, because if we look at the income, you've got 950 points to spend in Phase B, and putting the cost into 3 Tigers and 2 Befehlpanthers is not ideal. But in general, the reason I have the Befehlpanthers in here isn't because I'll be bringing them in necessarily in Phase B, but it's because they're just better than the Panther A's you can get in Phase C. So yeah, if I go for just Tigers in Phase B, it's fine, but if I need anything more powerful, then a Befehlpanther can just be there instead. And that's kind of why I've got the option of both in Phase B. But there's always the opportunity, like I said, you could change the Tiger E's for some more availability in Phase C, maybe some Panther A's, because you've got plenty of command here in the way I've set it up. Now, as for the other units in the division, you've got the Panzer 4H here, and they're okay, but just not really worth it compared to the quality of the other tanks that you can get. Panther D's are just a little bit lackluster compared to the Befehlpanthers for 30 less points. Like that 14 front armor is incredibly important, and also just having the naturally extra command star there is fantastic. 14 front armor is so important because most sort of American units, they have like 13 AP, like the better American units anyway, and having 14 front armor means they can't penetrate you at max range. The only thing you need to be worried about with the Befehlpanther is things like 17 pounders and Fireflies. Fireflies can definitely penetrate these should they like basically charge you down en masse. So yeah, be careful. Befehlpanthers though, very, very strong compared to Panther D's. And Tigers, they do the job. Just again, be careful of anything with 13 AP at max range can penetrate you this time round, but you're relying more on your veterancy to make sure you land the first hit and get the kill, because 15 AP should be more than enough to kill basically most tanks on the Allied side, except for maybe a Jumbo. As for the Königsdagger in Phase B, you will never have enough points to bring this in, and if you're saving for it, then you're going to be losing a lot of your front line, so this is maybe something more for 10v10. As for the Panther A's, they are fantastic, just as good as the Befehl Panthers, but I don't find the extra card there, and I'd rather have a 2-star Königsdagger than two 1-star Königsdaggers for my Phase C, so that's why I have this Königsdagger in here. And you do have to look after it, of course, make sure it has all the fire support it needs, and it should survive till the end of the game. It's pretty hard to kill, honestly, so if you protect it properly, you're going to be absolutely fine. Right, as for support, so my support tab has changed quite a lot. Recently I've been using the 251-21, which is the 800 meter range 18 HE half track. Has these 3 guns on top of it, and it's very, very strong at ripping to shreds infantry, and also just like things like jeeps and so on. But generally, like, you use it to pin down infantry very quickly, and it does so very, 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 very fast. So for actually 18 HE bat, it's basically like a tri-Bolston on wheels. For 55 points, not too bad. I find it's a lot more reliable than the 258. The benefit of the 258 is it does have the 1000 meter range, but I just find that it's not very durable, and it gets itself killed quite often because you need to match the range of an AT gun in order to really hit it effectively. Like 9 HE, you can do the fire position short trick, but it takes like 3 shots to stun an AT gun, and it's just really unreliable. Like I said, there's much better ways in this division of dealing with AT guns. So that's about it. You don't want open blitz munitions in Phase A because you only get 1, and you have a limited amount of activation cards in the support tab. So let's have a look at what we have in Phase B. So SBW232, this has the 9 HE and 7 HE machine gun. Very useful command, just to have about 45 points is relatively cheap as well. You can use these as close fire supports as well as the command, because you obviously do have a lot of command coming out of your tanks anyway. So yeah, 2-star veteran C, can rip to shreds infantry very, very fast. Now if you compare the 232 to, for example, the 2341, you can see why I don't bring in the 2341 anymore. It's basically 20 points more expensive for exactly the same amount of damage. The only thing you're paying for with the 2341 is Recon for 20 more points, and in my opinion that's never going to be worth it. So there you go. The Griller, you can bring that in Phase B instead of maybe the Flampanzers, but I'm going to be bringing in the Flampanzer here, and this is just a beast of a unit. It can come in handy in so many ways, and if you're playing like a 40-minute game or even a 45-minute game, there are so many places where this can become useful, especially if, for example, your opponents have a foothold on a town and you're kind of struggling to push through. These can help you breach enemy defenses so damn well, and I've really, really fell in love with the Flampanzers. I wouldn't necessarily say that I end up bringing in all of them, because you do get 5 on the card, which is a lot, but in general, like 1 or 2 can definitely help you punch through where needed. Else, you can maybe look at getting something else like the 258s or the Griller. It's kind of up to you guys based on how you play the game or how you want to play around certain units. Let's move on to the Anti-Tank tab. So the Anti-Tank tab, we have the Pak 38, at the start, and I think that's pretty standard, honestly. You want at least 3 AT guns at the start of the game. It's just a general rule that I tend to go by. 10 AP, and does do the job against most things except from maybe Shermans with 10 armor or more. Also like Ram 2s from the Canadians and stuff, it might struggle to kill those. But that's why I have the Panzerschrecks. Now this is an interesting choice for this division, certainly, because a lot of people perceive the Panzer-Lehr to be like that division that can have these open engagements over ground and win, which is kind of what they do, yeah. But at the same time, Panzerschrecks are like fantastic. They have 10 accuracy, they penetrate anything if they hit. So just having a couple of these squads is like security for close combat, basically. If anything comes a little bit too close to a Panzer-Lehr, they're going to die. And that is the beauty of the Panzer-Lehr. It basically always pays itself off. The other benefit of this is that the half-track that it comes in, the 250-10, can be extremely useful as well. It also got a price reduction from 40 points to 35 points in one of the previous patches, so a little bit more value for money there. And it can just be used to pick off half-tracks and light enemy units quite nicely. And it, you know, like I said, it doesn't really cost too much. It's very, very nice sort of combination here, which generally pays itself off quite well. At least I've found since I've been using it. It's quite low availability in Phase A, but you just got to be a little bit careful with them, and they will definitely do wonders. So moving into Phase B, I have the Pak 40 75mm. These are just necessary, I would say, in so many ways, because obviously they can be hidden, and for 105 points, 13 AP is quite nice. You guys have seen multiple times how much I've made a Pak 40 kill before, and bringing them in Phase B is still a pretty good time to bring them in, especially when it's like the best AT you can use. So this is, yeah, more for just sort of bringing up those ambushes and just sort of forming an area of denial for enemy tanks. Of course, they are going to be targeted by enemy artillery pretty fast, but just be careful of that. Now moving into Phase C, I have the Jagdpanzer 4s. These are 190 points with 1-star veterancy. Fantastic for killing off Wolverines or Hellcats because they have 14 front armor again. So very similar to the Befehl Panthers. But what I find with the Jagdpanthers is I generally tend to bring them in to supplement if I can't really afford the heavier tanks in the mid game. So I'll go for like the Jagdpanzers like on the 20-minute mark if I'm finding that I'm having to put money, like cash into other things. So for example, if I'm putting a lot of cash into infantry because I'm being pressured quite hard, then I will support that with the Jagdpanzer 4 rather than splashing out 280 points for a Befehl Panther or a Königsdagger. The other benefit of the Jagdpanzer is, like in Phase C, you know, you get 150 points per tick, so you're going to be fine. Also, if you want to save from Phase B, it's 2 ticks to buy 1 Jagdpanzer. So there's that as well to think about. It's actually quite nice if you just sort of save for the last 2 minutes and bring in a Jagdpanzer, because you basically very good value for money at that point in the game. As for the Phase B Jagdpanzers, I don't sort of rate them because they don't have any veterancy, and they basically do the same job as Pak 40s there. You can bring in more Panzertreks in Phase B, and honestly I've been tempted to for a little while. Maybe you replace the Jagdpanzers in Phase C for more Panzertreks in Phase B, which isn't something that I would often recommend, but I found Panzertreks incredibly useful in this division. Let's move on to the anti-air. So anti-air is one of the weird ones in this division compared to other divisions, mainly because the cost is a problem, a big problem. If you look at Phase A, you've got 75 points per minute, then you've got 95 points per minute, which is one of the lowest in the game. And this doesn't really allow you to bring in much AA at all. And AA is something that you definitely need in order to protect your heavier tanks. So for example, if you bring in a Befehl Panther in Phase B, and somebody brings out a Typhoon AT or something, you need this AA, you just need it. Otherwise, you're going to lose that Befehl Panther for free, and it's really, really hard to deal with sometimes. So sometimes it can be worth maybe neglecting your tanks in Phase B and going for more like anti-air, and just like bringing it in, basically getting it set up so that you can make a tank push. But at the same time, if you don't bring in a tank, often you lack the power against what enemies can bring up against you. So it's basically making that conscious decision of what you expect your opponent to be fighting at you with, and that mainly comes down to divisions. So that's the choice you have to kind of make in game. But let's have a look at what we actually have here. So Flak 38 20mm in Phase A, cheap 20mm. They sort of do the job at taking out enemy fighters with no veterancy, and also just stopping recon planes. That's generally what they're good for, and they do provide that little bit extra damage for when you finally bring in the Flak 36-37mm with the 10HE and 1000 meter range. So I've got the 37mm in Phase B just because they are much more likely to stun things quick enough than the Gepards. You're going to have a hard time stunning things and stopping them hitting your tanks with the Gepards and 20mm Flaks because they just don't have the range and they don't have the HE or suppression to stop a plane from dropping its payload. Whereas a Flak 36 around the same level as a tank can probably stop maybe like a Typhoon AT from actually hitting your tank altogether. So there's that to think about. If you had 4 Flak 36s on the field alongside your tanks, then you should be okay. And if you have it backed up by a Flak 41 in Phase C, then that's even better. Of course, you want to probably keep this Flak 88 back. It's not one that you want to send to the front line just because you only have one of them. And you definitely want it there to provide denial in the air. And that's pretty much my AA. Everything else is just a little bit lackluster. The SDKFZs, they're okay, and they would be quite nice to accompany tanks, but the range kind of lets them down in this case. As for artillery, so the 257 is almost definitely necessary. 1200 meter range mortar helps you basically pinpoint kill enemy AT early on. Then I also have the Panzerwerfer, and the Panzerwerfer is an interesting choice because you don't actually have that many points to work with in Phase A, but I find if you hit the right mark with a Panzerwerfer, it can change a game, especially in like the early phases. If, for example, you're pushing into a town and your enemy comes into the town, you hit them with a Panzerwerfer, you like crush the town completely, like that's a big swing in the game. So Panzerwerfer can do a lot of work. It's also good for taking out AT guns, but maybe a little less reliable than a mortar. So I'll generally bring in the mortar first, Panzerwerfer later, keep the Panzerwerfer safe, you can use it throughout the game, and just supply it once you get to Phase B. As for Phase B in this division, you get even more availability of mortars in Phase B, but I'm actually using the Vespers now. The Vesper, these are relatively useful because they have the 4 round per minute rate of fire, which is okay, it's not fantastic, but they have the range to match enemy artillery, so things like 25 pounders and so on, and M1 howitzers especially. They're just good for that sort of counter artillery role. I wouldn't necessarily bring in a artillery piece just to counter artillery though. So the benefit of the Vesper is that it also has the smoke capability to assist your infantry and tanks in the mid game, and smoke's actually relatively important to keep your tanks alive, especially if, for example, a Königstiger or a Befehlpanther is being smashed by like Air Force, bombing strikes and so on, and then they're like charging it with tanks. Making sure it's smoked so it can actually get out of there and recover is very, very important. So make sure you do that should you need to. I also have the BEO Panzer 4H in my division. This is a 2-star Panzer 4 with quite low armor, but does have the 173mm off-map barrage that it can bring in. And this is just pretty decent for, again, helping with AT guns and just in general pinning down enemy forces and forcing out things like Shermans from behind tree lines. Because one thing that can really catch out the Panzer-Lehr is obviously you're going to have a limited amount of tanks until Phase C. And if the allies play properly, they can play around the tree lines with like Shermans and stuff, like poke out and then like shoot you at like really close range. But if you know they're there and you use Recon effectively, what you can do is bring in this Panzer 4, like arty, like off-map arty, the tanks that are in cover, and then they'll be panicked, and then you can just go around and kill them for free. A lot of people like to do this with planes. They bring in bombers, they bomb the tanks, and then they charge them with their own tanks, and the tanks can't do anything, which they've just bombed because they're panicked. So yeah, that's just my way of doing it in this division. You can get Nebelwerfer 41s in Phase C, but you should still have your Panzerwerfer alive. If you don't, then you kind of made a little bit of a mistake there. But yeah, the Nebelwerfer 41s, they are okay, but just not really worth the card, in my opinion. And then Hummels, these are fine, 30 points more than the Vesper. They have a lot more HE than the Vesper, and they can be very, very strong at annihilating infantry and AT guns. But I find the Vesper just a lot more versatile for providing that smoke more specifically when we come into the later game. Let's move on to the air tab. So in the air tab, it's very small, not too much to talk about. The Me-109 G6R6 with 1 star in Phase A. I've got the Focke-Wulf 190 A8 in Phase B with 2 stars, and the Focke-Wulf 190 G1s with the 15 HE power bombs. Now, I've been very tempted to actually remove the Focke-Wulf 190 G1s and find an activation point elsewhere. But honestly, I find this is like the best use of points for the Panzer-Lehr, because you're not going to be investing in a massive air force throughout the game. And the only time that you're going to be bringing in maybe the Focke-Wulf 190 G1s is in like Phase B, when you can actually, or Phase C, sorry, when you have the points to spare. But the Focke-Wulf 190 A8 with 2 stars, this can definitely pick up a lot of kills if it's supported with anti-air on the ground. So that's something you can definitely play around. And if you're really being harassed heavily in Phase A, then the Me-109 G6R6 is the way to go. This is something that you might invest in against maybe the 6th Airborne, for example, if you wanted to take down their Pathfinder early. But there you go. That's pretty much it for the air tab. Not too much else to talk about. The Recon's just not good enough. It doesn't have any veterancy, so it will just get stunned and panicked and forced to fall back very, very quickly by very little AA, and 50 cals will do that job very easily. So yeah, the Recon's not worth it, and that's your lot for the Panzer-Lehr. So yeah, this is a very interesting division. It's, again, not a division that I'm necessarily super confident with, but these changes that I've been making to it lately allows me to put a lot more aggressive pressure on in Phase A. You have got to be careful in Phase B with your income. It can definitely bite you very, very badly, especially against sort of quite tank-heavy divisions like the 3rd Armoured, 4th Armoured, the Guards Armoured. If they pressure you hard in Phase B, you could definitely fall behind quite far, because you don't necessarily have the income to match their tanks. So even though you have Befell Tigers and Befell Panthers on your division, it's just very hard to afford those without losing out in other ways. But once you get into Phase C and use that last 20 minutes as effectively as you can, that's when the game will really come to life with the Panzer-Lehr. But Phase A, I think, honestly, you can be extremely aggressive in Phase A if you play it right. But if it goes wrong, then you're just going to lose. And that's probably the biggest risk with the Panzer-Lehr. But there you go. That is the way that I'm playing it these days. And hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what you guys think, of course, of my division, and discuss, obviously, what your divisions are like. I know this is a very interesting take on the Panzer-Lehr. It's a bit different to a lot of the other ones I would see, but just something that I guess I've been trying out lately and been having quite a lot of fun with. So there you go. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.